Okay, so in module 5, we did multiplication of polynomials. Now, in this module concerning factoring, we're going to be undoing that multiplication. It's essentially what factoring means. And so we'll start with the basic, which is finding the GCF. And the GCF stands for the greatest common factor. And so the greatest common factor is the biggest number or biggest thing when we get into variables that all terms involved have in common. So if I look at 12 and 24, what is the biggest number that goes into those? So we can start easy, and some may say 2. So then that gives us 6 and 12. Then someone might say 3, and that gives us 2 and 4. And then we'd see 2, and that gives us 1 and 2. So now there's nothing that we have in common. So now we multiply those. 2 times 3 is 6, times 2 is 12. So our GCF of 12 and 24 is 12. Now, we could have seen that by just looking at 12 and 24. So now, as we look at number 2, we want to find your GCF. Now we're looking at 3 terms. So as we look at 12, 18, and 6, we want to find the biggest number that goes into all of those. So again, I'll do that reverse ladder. And let's start with a 2. That gives me 6, 9, and 3. And then from there we see that a 3 goes into all of them, and that gives me 2, 3, and 1. So that's my smallest. So then our GCF is 6. Now as we look at number 3, some of us might start seeing the biggest number. You don't have to do that stepped ladder. It's totally okay, just a nice tool for you to use. But as I look at this, I'm going to go with 4. And we'll just double check here. So we get 9, 6, and 2. And then there's nothing that goes into those 3 terms, so our GCF in this case is 4. All right, so 4 and 5, your turn. Go and do those, and then we'll discuss those when you come back into class. Now, we can also find the GCF of terms with variables. So again, I have 4x cubed, 12x squared, and then 8x. So we can start with numbers. So some of us may see that 4 goes into each, and so that gives me x cubed. That gives me an x squared, and that gives me, a 3x squared, and then a 2x. For number-wise, there's nothing left, but then we go here, and they all have an x in common, so I'm going to take away an x. That gives me an x squared. That gives me just 1x there, and that takes away that x, just giving us a 2. There's no x's in common, so then our GCF is 4x. So now as we look at number 7, we can do that reverse ladder. Start with your numbers. So what's the biggest number, or what's a number that goes into 5 and 10? Well, just 5. So that gives me v to the 5th plus 2v to the 3rd. Now that plus or minus later has no effect on this process. We're still just looking for the GCF of all the terms as we did on number 6. Now there's no numbers left. We have 1 and 2, so there's nothing there. So now we're going to look for our variables. Let's say we have a v. That leaves us with v to the 4th plus 2v squared. And then this time we see, oh, there's two v's that they have in common, so I have a v squared. And then we're just subtracting those exponents, so I get a v squared there, and then a 2. No variables left, so then this becomes our GCF, so it's 5. And then I have 1, 2, 3 v, so v cubed. All right, let's look at 8. Now, you can do the ladder still. Some of you guys are maybe getting to the point where you don't need the ladder to organize. You look at this, what's the greatest number that goes into both? And you'd say it's 3. And then there are no t's, so then our GCF is just 3. Now what we'll get to is then we'll start looking at what is left over. So if I take a 3 out of that, that gives me t squared. And if I take a 3 out of that, that gives me 6. So 3 is my GCF. And then this is what is left over. Let's look at 9 here. I'll do another one with that reverse ladder. So look at our numbers first. So we start with a 2. That gives me 2b cubed minus a b squared minus 3b. So we have no numbers left. 2, 1, and 3 doesn't do anything for us. Then we look at our variables. So we have a b. So that gives me a 2b minus a b. And then that b is gone. So we just have 3. So then there's that. And so our GCF now is 2b. And then here's what we have left on the inside. That should be a b squared. So 2b squared minus b minus 3. All right, so as I alluded to, number 8 is, and then showed on 9, is we want to use the GCF now to factor. So the very first step in factoring is find the GCF and then factor out that GCF. Finding the GCF and factoring out is a form of factoring. You're factoring out the GCF. So as we look at this problem, we want to find our GCF. So we'll do our ladder one more time here. So I have 3 in common. That leaves me with an x cubed minus 4x squared plus 5x. Then I pull out an x. That now leaves me with an x squared minus 4x plus 5. So then our GCF is 3x. I now want to factor that out, so I get 3x on the outside. And the nice thing when we do the ladder, that tells us what is left on the inside. Now eventually we'll get to looking to see if we can factor that further, but right now we are just focused on the GCF. So let's look at 11 here. So as I look at that one, I say my GCF is 4x. So then I go to factor that out. I have 4x. And then 8 divided by 4 is 2. I have 2x. I pulled 1 out, so I'm left with 1x. 12 divided by 4 is 3. And then I had 1x and I factored 1 out, so there's no x's left. So we're undoing what we did previously. So previously you were given this problem and we distribute 4x times 2x. 4 times 2 is 8. X times x, we add our exponents, and that's 8x squared. Multiply in 4 times negative 3 is a negative 12. And then we just have the x, which is that there. All right, so as we look at 12, we now have an extra variable in there. So let's go back and do our ladder. Again, just deal with your numbers. So let's say we see a 2, so I get a 4xy here, plus a 2xy squared. And we see we can still pull out another 2. So it gives me 2xy plus xy squared. So there's no more numbers we can deal with. Now we can deal with each variable individually. So we deal with our x. So pull out an x there. So that 1x is now gone. That 1x is now gone, leaving us with 2y plus y squared. And then now we deal with the y's just like we dealt with the x's. So I can pull out a y, and that gives me 2 plus y. Now we look at all of this for our GCF. So 2 times 2 is 4, and then we have x, y. So we have 4xy. Once we factored that out, we are left with 2 plus y as our answer there. All right, 13. So as we look at this, what's the biggest number that goes into 6, 12, and 24? So that is a 6. And then what's our greatest m? We have 3, 2, and 1. And so the greatest that goes in all of them is a 1m. So we have 6m. When we factor that out, that leaves us with 1m squared minus 12 divided by 6 is 2. M squared, take out 1 is 1m. 24 divided by 6 is 4. Take out 1m, that leaves us with no m's. And there is that factored out with the GCF. Okay, your turn to do 14, 15, and 16. We will discuss those when we come into class. And then you have your quizzes to complete. And then our essential question is, how is the GCF found? So go ahead and answer for that as well, because we'll discuss that as well in class.